This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. Welcome. If you're just joining us, apologies for the slightly late start. We had a few technical problems to get the panel set up. But we will start very shortly. We're just letting people come in from the waiting room. We are delighted to be spending the morning with you. Well, not the morning. We've booked you for an hour and a half, but we may not need quite that long. So we'll see how things go. We might be able to finish a little early. Welcome to this webinar, which is about the Propel programme, and in particular the Deliver and Develop grants that are focused on the Building Strong Communities mission. I'm delighted to be joined. Well, my name is Geraldine. I'm the Director of Collaboration at London Funders. London Funders, we're not a funder ourselves, we're the umbrella group for funders in London. And what we do is support collaboration between funders. So we have been convening and supporting the Propel collaboration. I'm delighted to be joined by Yolande, who is strategy.
Oh, good morning, everybody. I'm Yolande. I don't know if we've just temporarily lost Geraldine's audio. I think she was just introducing me as Strategy Director for London's Communities at London Councils, and I'm also a trustee of London Funders. And thank you very much, everybody, for giving up your precious time. We would have probably then moved over to Shagufta.
Thanks, Yolande. I'm Shagufta, and I am the head of Propel programme at the City Bridge Trust. So one of the many funders that are involved in the collaboration.
Thanks so much, guys, for picking that up while I dropped out of the Zoom meeting, and hopefully that won't happen again. So what we're going to do this morning is I'll do a bit of an overview of Propel. I'll hand over to Yolande, who will talk more about the Building Strong Communities mission. Shagufta is going to talk about the focus of grants under the Building Stronger Communities mission, and then we'll do some of the kind of practicalities about how you go about applying for this. So this is a webinar, so you can see us, but we can't see you, and you can't speak directly to us. But what you can do is put questions in the Q&A box at the bottom, and we'll stop and take questions after each section. So hopefully lots of opportunity to you can see what other people have asked. So it might be that you're wanting to ask the same question, but we'll try and manage that Q&A box. And this session is being recorded, so we'll make it available on YouTube afterwards if anyone wants to go back and revisit, or for people who couldn't come to this session. And tomorrow, we've spent the whole week doing workshops and webinars about the Propel programme. Tomorrow we will update the FAQs that are available on the website with all of the questions that have been asked this week. So if you've already had a look at the FAQs and downloaded them, there'll be a new version up by the end of tomorrow. So you might want to go back and have another look. Right, so I am going to start. I'm going to share my screen. Let me just hide that. Bear with me. I'm hoping that, can you see that, panelists? Oh, yes, great. Yes, so this is what we're going to cover today. So let me get on the first bit and introduce Propel. So the Propel programme is a collaboration of funders in London working together with equity partners. So those are the organisations who support small frontline organisations who led for the communities they serve. We'll talk more about that in a bit. This is a funding programme which is looking at long-term systemic change, and it's about bringing people together in partnership to work towards a more equitable London. The funders who are involved in this, and London funders, have lots of experience of doing funder collaborations, and London funders mainly get involved when there's a crisis. So some of you will be familiar with the London Community Response, which was a collaboration of 67 funders, which gave out almost £60 million over, starting 4 days after the first lockdown was announced, and working together over a year. And one of the key experiences of that programme was bringing equity partners to the collaboration with us. And as a result of that, over 75% of the funding went to organisations who were led by and for the communities most affected by COVID. So this programme is similar, takes that a similar approach. It's a single application form which will get you in front of multiple funders. It's a partnership with the equity infrastructure organisations. And it came about because we went back to, after the last London Community Response grant had been made, London funders went back to everyone who'd been involved and said, wow, that was amazing. What would it look like? How would it be if we did the same thing, but we did it about long-term funding instead of crisis funding? And we absolutely recognise that there is a crisis. Your organisations and the communities you serve will be being really impacted by the cost of living crisis. This programme is not about addressing that. This programme is about addressing underlying issues. It feels that we are in crisis after crisis after crisis, and what Propel does is give us all an opportunity to step back and take a breath and say, actually, what are the roots of these problems and how can we work together to address them? We absolutely understand that addressing the roots of problems, or the structural and systemic inequalities that underpin them, is a huge task, and one that will take time. And Propel is, we absolutely want to make sure that the groups, we believe that the groups who are closest to those problems are the ones that understand them best, are the ones that have can come up with the best solutions to dealing with them, and are best placed to lead collaborations which will make the change happen. So Propel is about getting resources out to you to lead that change, and it's a long-term journey. So Propel is about taking the first steps on that journey. So there are Explore grants available, which are for a year for people to explore the issues that are driving the need for their work. Or a larger grant for up to 3 years, which is about if you're already doing some of that thinking, you're already delivering stuff that will deliver change. Then it's a 3-year grant, and then both of those will give you the opportunity to move on to a long-term flexible funding partnership of possibly 5 years, possibly more. There was something else important I was going to say at that point, but it will come back to me on another slide, so I'll carry on. Okay. I've already talked a bit about the London Community Response. So this group, these partners, the funders and the equity partners, have been working for a year to develop a set of ambitions for Propel, and this is all about acting collectively, prioritising equity, being bold, taking risks together, trying to have impact across the whole system rather than just on individual issues, and delivering long-term funding. And there are also a set of principles, and you can see the same words come up again about systemic, equitable, long-term, flexible. And these principles have been in, are absolutely driving the design of the programme and the processes that support it. And then there are a number of ways in which the programme will support this kind of systemic approach to issues. So through collaboration, by bringing people together, so that's bringing funders together to think about how they do things, bringing grantees together and bringing funders and grantees together, so that we make sure that we're drawing on what you have is real expertise and lived experience in how the underlying issues are affecting people's lives. What funders can bring to the table is obviously some money, the power to convene people, the possibility that we can get people to the table that you need to be engaging with. We'll be supporting this kind of systemic approach through grants, but we will also be supporting a systemic approach through learning. So we will, for those of you who are successful in securing a grant, there will be we'll set up a learning network. So we'll be bringing you together on a, from time to time throughout the grant to reflect together with funders about, how change happens and what is needed to really support those who are delivering. We, the missions, there are recovery missions in London, and I'll let Yolande talk a bit more about how those recovery missions were developed and the kind of cross-sector buy-in that they already have. But you might already be familiar with the missions, but there are 10 of them, and the Propel programme is focusing on 3 of them. New Deal for Young People, which we're going to hear more about today. We're going to hear about, we've already heard about the New Deal for Young People. Building strong communities is what we're hearing about today. And then the third one is the robust safety net. And these are absolutely, all of these, there are intersections between all of these. But when you're applying for a Deliver and Develop grant, you will need to select one of them and to say, this is the one that we're going to be working on. And we'll hear more about the Building Strong Communities mission from Yolande very shortly, but just a little bit of information up front about the grants themselves. The Deliver and Develop grants are for organisations who are already delivering. It's to enable you to expand what you do, to scale up a partnership if you're already working in partnership, or build a new one. So you don't need to already have a partnership in place. You can build one during the lifetime of your grant. It's for you to articulate why you think, how you think your work is impacting, is making change happen, and then to really test the assumptions you're making and gather the evidence to show what works and also what doesn't work. Absolutely, really, really important to understand what doesn't work. And then for you to think about actually how might this be embedded or scaled up through a longer term grant. So the Deliver and Develop grants, they're about delivering first and then developing. They're for up to 3 years. We think that about 40 grants are likely to be made, and that's across all 3 of the missions. And they can be from pretty small to pretty gigantic. So there's a big scale there. So applications are absolutely welcome from the smallest alongside the larger size grants. Who is eligible for these? The first question is, is your work of benefit to Londoners? So lots of the organisations in the room today will be based in London, will be delivering all their work in London, or possibly in parts of, in neighbourhoods in London. If you're a national organisation or you're based outside of London, you're going to need to be able to show how your work is of benefit to Londoners, and how you will restrict any grant to Londoners. You will need to be one of these types of organisation: a registered charity, a charitable incorporated organisation, that's a CIO, a community interest company, that's a CIC, or a charitable community benefit society, also known as a BENCOM. We've had a lot of questions in the webinars so far about companies limited by guarantee. If that's not, companies limited by guarantee are not eligible to apply to this grant. But if you're not one of these organisations, you could be part of a collaboration that's applying for a grant, but the lead organisation needs to be one of these types of organisation. So as I said, you will need to already be delivering work and be ready to expand that work. We align with the principle about equity. We are going to prioritise applications from communities that are led by and for marginalised communities. And there's a focus on these 4 communities, those that are experiencing racial inequity, deaf and disabled people, LGBT plus people, and women and girls. So organisations that are led by women, but are focusing on work that is specifically targeted at women and girls. And 2 definitions I need to give you here. When I say prioritise, I mean applications from those organisations will be assessed first. So you can still apply if you're not one of those organisations, and there is there's space on the application form for you to tell us how you put equity and justice at the heart of your work. And there's a definition, there's quite a strict definition of what we mean by equity-led. This has been agreed with our equity partners. It means that more than 75% of your trustees and more than 50% of your staff are people from the communities that you serve or have lived experience of the issues that you're tackling. We've had a couple of questions in previous workshops about, I'm close to that threshold, but not quite there. And the response is that, well, that means you wouldn't be prioritised, but funders would absolutely recognise that you're on that journey, and so would take that into account. And then we encourage applications from organisations that are already thinking in a systemic way, and we can come back to what that means, if that's helpful, and also from organisations who are already working in collaboration. But you don't have to be working in a collaboration. You can apply as a single organisation and use the grant to build your partnership over time. So I will stop there and have a quick look at the questions. So local authorities, can they be part of an application? Absolutely. It would be brilliant if you are already working in partnership with the local authority, or you want them to be part of your partnership. They obviously won't be able to be the lead organisation, but they will be yes, absolutely, really great if they're part of your partnership. Tessa, I'm sorry, there's no funding for social enterprises unless you are a CIC or a CIO. But as I said, you could be a partner in an application. Tracy, funding range per year, so it's 1.5 million total. Some of the funders, so that will be about £500,000 a year. Oh, we've got Christine joining the panel, fantastic. Yes, so if you were only working for 2 years, it might be slightly more than that. You could apply for 600 or 700 per year, but the 1.5 over 3 years is the maximum. Shahida, explore grants, can they lead to further funding through subsequent deliver and develop? Yes, that's absolutely right. So the point of an explore grant is it's the first step on a journey, which will then allow you to go on to other types of the other grants. A question from Adina about unincorporated charitable associations. Shagufta, do you want to take that one? Are you there, Shagufta? We'll come back. There's a couple of other questions about eligibility, types of organisations. So we'll come back to Shagufta in a minute. I think she was having some Wi-Fi. Everyone's having Wi-Fi problems this week. Explain a bit more about what you mean by communities experiencing racial inequity. Does it include the immigrant communities as well? Absolutely would include migrant communities whose experience will be compounded by the racial inequity they'll be experiencing. So yes, couple of questions on migrants there. Yes, these are really good questions about if you're already receiving funding from one of the funders who's involved in this, you can still apply, and this will be treated as a separate thing. So don't worry if you already get funding from CBT, you can, or you're about to apply for CBT under one of their existing programs, you can also apply for this. A question here about this is from Mark at the Abbey Community Association. What about broad-based organisations who focus on a range of issues? Including one of your priorities for which funding is sought. So this is what we would call an intersectional organisation, and that criteria, about 75% of your trustees and 50% of your staff can come from more than one of those communities. Christine, would you like to say any more about intersectional organisations? Christine, are you there? We seem to be having lots. Oh, hello, Christine. Hi.
Yeah, no, it's just that. Yeah, Malin just like promoted me to a panelist, but it won't allow me to switch my video on. So okay. It says the host is like preventing you from using your video. So sorry about that. Okay. Yes. But I am here now, yes.
Okay, I'm going to make you a co-host. That might enable you to switch your video on. But with that, we can hear you. So would you like to say a bit more about intersectional organisations?
Yes, thank you, Geraldine. So yes, so I suppose we ourselves here are a sort of an extreme example of an intersectional organisation ourselves, in that we work across all the different communities that are covered by protected characteristics and equality groups. But many of our member organisations are specialist organisations working with particular communities, but are focused on people that are across different protected characteristics. So, for example, organisations might be working with Muslim women, for example, or some of our members, for example, work with LGBT older people. They might even have projects that focus, say, on LGBT older people, but from other communities as well, particularly if there are challenges in certain communities. So they might have particular projects around people from different faiths or community ethnic groups within that project. So it's really about where you are specialising on supporting or working with, and or you're coming from a community around a particular protected characteristic or equality group, but not focusing solely on just working with disabled people or women and so on. So we ourselves work across all the protected characteristics. So we work to make sure that in our case that our trustee board and members of staff reflect that wide intersectional sort of experience. And so I think you can think about it as pan-equality or intersectional, because intersectional tends to really sort of describe the individuals that you're working with, because obviously people have very complex identities, and so you may be working with disabled people who are from a particular ethnic background because they have particular needs around their disability, and so they will have intersectional identities. But you could also be a pan-equality organisation where you were working across different equality fields that may, and some of that work may be intersectional and some may be more pan-equality. I hope that makes sense. And just it's about reflecting in your staff, volunteers and trustees strongly the groups that you work with, even if they're not from one community. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great, Christine. Thank you. That's really, really helpful. And if your organisation is not is led by and for, but not one of those 4 communities that was on the slide earlier, there is space in the application form for you to tell us about other communities that you're led by and for. So there's a question here about organisations working with homeless people, organisations supporting mainly elderly people. You can tell us all about that in the application. So that somebody muted me. I am going on a bit, I know. Yes, there are quite a few questions in the box here about companies limited by guarantee. I'm sorry that you are not one of the eligible organisations to apply. We have to go with what the funders who we're working with can actually fund. But as I said, you can be part of an application if in collaboration with others. So we're going to go on now to Yolande to hear more about the, hello Christine, we can see you now. We're going to go on to Yolande to hear more about the Building Strong Communities mission. I've got a slide for you, Yolande.
Thank you, Geraldine.
There you go. Can you see that?
It's probably just about to load, so thank you very much, Geraldine. And there we are, perfect, thank you. So thank you everybody for your precious time this morning. As Geraldine has said, the grants are linked to 3 of the 10 missions, which are supported by the London Recovery Board. And that Recovery Board was set up during COVID, but towards the end of COVID, when we were starting to think about how do we support communities to recover from COVID. To a certain extent, we have moved on from the term recovery, but some of the focus of these missions still remain pertinent and important to this day. And one of those is building strong communities. There's loads of things that Geraldine has actually said about the grants, which are really pertinent and important for this mission. This is very much about how communities who really understand the challenges that they're facing, well, you've got the solutions too. It's not about us telling you what the solutions are. So Building Strong Communities mission is very much about how do we ensure that Londoners have got access to the resources that they need to ensure that they can do the things that they need to do to build their own networks. We don't build strong communities, communities build strong communities. So the kinds of things that we're looking for in the grants are where you're looking to develop community strength, so supporting that local community-led activity, that community-led leadership of resources that help communities grow a sense of ownership and belonging. Community voice, so important. And you'll note in the slide, actually, we do specifically cite COVID there. Supporting groups, organisations, large and small, to raise those unheard, neglected community voices, and also supporting communities to help them speak truth to power, and then also expecting power to show through their action that their voice has been heard and that citizens' voices at the centre of that change, and they become part of the decision-making process in local areas. And again, especially communities that are disproportionately impacted by COVID. And that, of course, deliberately leans into the fact that the grants are very much prioritising organisations that are led by and for, because our equity-led groups that work with us at London Funders have clearly shown us that those were the groups, those were the communities really disproportionately impacted by COVID. But we also know that they were disproportionately impacted by many other things before COVID arrived too. And then community connections, strengthening networks, helping communities build their social capital. Some of that social capital, we know people need to do that through collaboration, working with other communities that may have done some of this work before. So how can we support communities to collaborate with each other? And we also recognise that sometimes when we talk about communities, people think about geography. But sometimes our communities will be the communities of need. They might not be populated, literally physically populated in the same geography. So some of that collaboration might actually be reaching across larger geographies within London. So this is very much about us wanting to see in proposals, actually, how do we strengthen community voice? How do we help community voice to be heard by those who are in power and those who make decisions? How do we support communities to actually be part of that decision-making process? And just very quickly, just to let you know some of the things that we've been doing as a mission team. And I do say team because you'll note all the pretty little icons and logos at the top there. So the Mayor of London, London councils, obviously London Funders, London Plus, which is a huge part of this team, City Bridge Trust and Black Thrive. So all of these organisations have worked together to make sure that we're trying to support communities to support themselves. Some other things that we've also done is we've developed something called the Civic Strength Index. You can Google that, have a look at it. Hopefully that will help you, support you to do some of the work that you do. There might even be some evidence base in there to help you put your proposals together. And also working through the Mayor's Office and the Greater London Authority, supporting specific programmes in terms of securing places where communities can get support to make sure that they're secure, and also supporting community organisations, again, to build up their capacity. So that's some of the work that we've been doing. Happy to answer any questions, Geraldine.
Okay, let me stop sharing. Let's have a Portia Gift has had a power cut in our house. So we may not. So let's have a look at any questions on the mission.
Geraldine, there's not a question there I can see on the mission just for the moment. There's one interesting question there, and sorry, the questions are just floating around a little bit. There's one about what does the success rates look like? I'd just like to point to something that Geraldine mentioned when she was talking through the grants, and that was, it's also important that we hear about what doesn't work. So part of us talking to you about your proposals is, it's not as linear as just looking for a success rate, or we want X number of people to do this or do that. Actually, this is very much about, we want to try new things, we want to support you to try new things, and we recognise that some of those new things might not work. But the really important part here is, what's the learning? How can we learn from it, and how can we share that learning? So it's not that kind of linear success rate that we're looking for. And I know that that sounds unusual, and we also recognise that might make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, but we do mean it. We recognise that some of this is about trying, and we really do also recognise that some of this has got to be about new things too.
That's great. That's really helpful. And in terms of the success rate for applications, this is a completely new programme. We've never done a funding round like this before. So we have no idea how many people are likely to apply. We know that we will probably give out about 40 grants for the Deliver and Develop grants and about 20 Explore grants. So it will. So we can't give you an indication of what the success rate is likely to be, I'm afraid. If we do another round next year, we'll have a much better idea. Let's go on to now. We were going to ask Shagufta to present this slide. So this is about the focus for the under the Building Strong Community. Building Strong Communities is quite a broad mission. There's quite a lot going on in there. So the focus for the D&D grants, let me see if I can get this up again. So Yolande, you and I might need to try and do this one together because Shagufta's had a power cut. So the grants that are being made available under the Building Strong Communities mission are about the community resources that Yolande has talked about, you know, whether that's networks or that's voice or that's connections. These grants are about growing, underpinning or growing those kinds of resources. So it is about strengthening voice and leadership, strengthening engagement, strengthening networks across, particularly across marginalised communities. And this is, you know, that might be linked to a building, but it absolutely might be non-physical networks bringing together communities of interest across London rather than communities in a place. And we're not talking about capital costs here. We're talking about the revenue funding. And then the second one is about making sure that these resources are protected for the community. So making sure they're sustainable, or making sure that new assets are coming into community ownership. Yolande, is there anything that you can do there that would clarify exactly what we're talking about here?
Yeah, thank you, Geraldine. So you might be wondering, why have we used the expressions physical and or non-physical? When we were testing out some wording, we actually used the expression physical or virtual. And quite often when you use the term virtual, people automatically think website, something to do with the website. We recognise that what we're talking about here is that there are tons of different types of resources that communities need to support themselves, to grow and develop. So basically what we're saying here is we recognise it's not always a place or a space. It might not be a website. It might be a person. It might be how a person works. And we kind of want to see that coming out through the applications. These are the things that my community needs to be able to thrive and flourish. And they might not be the obvious things when we recognise that. So we had to find a way of trying to capture that, physical and or non-physical. The really important bit here, though, is just to back up what Geraldine said. This is not about capital costs, so that's really important. This is just revenue funding. The part around sustainability and protection for the community, and one of the kind of pleasures about the Deliver and Develop grants, potentially going for up to 3 years, is we do want to see how we can ensure that what you will want to develop through your grants is something that can be sustained within the community. And again, things that can be sustained may not be physical assets or attributes. They might be, but they may also not be. So again, we recognise we might see some new and interesting things coming through. Now, I appreciate that is broad, but it's meant to be. So because what we're desperately trying not to do here is tell you what you should be doing. We're asking you to say to us, this is what my community needs, or this is what our communities need to be able to grow and thrive and flourish. And that does mean it's quite broad.
Brilliant, thank you. Christine, anything that you would like to add there about non-physical resources? I'm thinking about the kind of work that the HERE network does, which is very non-physical. Yeah, we can hear you now.
I was just getting to my unmute button, sorry.
That's okay.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, I think that our work is certainly like totally based around sort of that network support. Our own work is very broad in that we are like covering many different communities and facilitating them to come together. And I think that a lot of the applications for deliver and develop will be around identified needs for maybe intersectional or pan equality, but probably more focused communities. But the same things really apply. Is what we're always looking for really is what are the communities that either directly belong to our network or are supported and worked with through the groups and organisations that belong to a network. What are they seeking to like achieve on the ground? What changes do they want to make and need to make? And then the mechanisms and the levers for making that change. And often we feel that we're acting as an opportunity for people to have a more stronger collective voice around these changes, because often people, especially people that are working just in a very local area, say a volunteer or a community campaigner working in a very small area around where they live, can feel really quite isolated because they may be doing great stuff, but they may not hear about things that other people are doing or be able to connect with them to join forces on things. So enabling people to feel less isolated in their work, bringing people together who are working on similar things, have similar aims, and also being able to support them to find, we often say it's not just get through the doors of the people that can make the change. So maybe like decision makers or policy makers that are the people that we want to hear the voices of the people in local communities. It's not just about how do you get through the door. It's about even knowing where the door is and a step back from that, knowing that there is a door. If that makes sense. And I think that's often what we say about like sort of supporting like voice and influence and so on, is people might not even know that there is a door to go through, let alone where it is or how to get through it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks, Christine. It's really helpful. I hope that was, you know, this is a broad mission. There are, but we're really keen to hear from you on what your communities need. So let's see if there are questions about this. Yolande, please jump in if you spot particular questions about the mission. There are still questions. Hang on. Okay, so there's a question at the end about competing against big organisations with a team of fundraisers or micro organisations led by 75% of the people that they serve. And about, I mean, I would say that the organisation, the funding programme is absolutely directed at led by and for organisations, but is still open to organisations who are really, really embedded in their communities, understand what the needs are, can show that they have a track record of meeting them, and are trusted by communities. And there are opportunities in the application form, as I said earlier, for you to show how you do that. Still quite a few questions about eligibility. Again, I'm really sorry that we can't, that companies by guarantee aren't one of the eligible types of organisations. But lots of you will also be a registered charity, so that's great. If you're also a registered charity, then you absolutely can apply. Interesting question here about what's the difference between the voice and leadership strand under the New Deal for young people and the voice and leadership strand under the Building Strong Communities mission. Yolande, can I come to you for that one?
Thanks, Geraldine. So with the New Deal for Young People mission, that's quite a specific mission, and they're quite heavily focused on mentoring, but unsurprisingly, through that mission, we also want to be able to see that young people's voice is also contributing to what is in proposals. Now, clearly, we're not excluding young people from building strong communities, but we don't have that very specific focus on mentoring. So, for example, in the same way that Christine was talking about a very kind of multi-factored approach to communities, we may have young people as part of the LGBT community who are part of a proposal. You might have young people's voice in terms of working with older people and supporting activity against loneliness in a community. So we're not excluding young people's voice from building strong communities, but young people's voice attached to the New Deal for Young People programme is very much attached to mentoring. It's quite specific, whereas we're much broader on building strong communities.
Brilliant. That's great. So there is a question here about exempt charitable status. Yes, you would. That means you would be eligible. Quite a few questions about partnerships. So you don't have to already be working in partnership to apply for this. You don't have to put a partnership together during the application window. We recognise that would be quite tricky in the 8 weeks that you have, or 9 weeks actually, since it was opened. So you can there's a question on partnerships in the application form, so you can talk about either who you're already working with, and if you're already in a partnership, funders will come back to you to ask for more information on those partner organisations. Or you can say that you are planning to put a partnership together during the lifetime of the grant and identify who you might want to be working with on that. Or you could say, actually, we don't need partners. This is something that we're doing well, and we're going to carry on doing it on our own. Although this is obviously we're very supportive of organisations that work really collaboratively and understand how they relate to other organisations in working on similar issues. Sorry, scrolling backwards and forwards through these questions. So you can only apply for one, you can only make one application. So you can't apply for 2 different missions. You can't apply for an Explore grant and a D&D grant. You need to work out which one suits you best and how you will Yes, and apply for that. And you can be a partner on other bids, but you can only lead one application. I think it might be helpful if I go on to the practical questions about how to apply. That might answer some of your questions, and then we'll come back and pick up anything that we haven't answered at the end. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen again. Sorry, guys. Right, so quick set of slides here about how to actually go about applying. So you go onto the website, londonpropel.org.uk, and it's an online application process. So you set up an account, which means you can come and go, and you can start and stop and come back and finish off. And there are 3 things that you need to do. One is answer the eligibility questions. So that's 2 questions. Are you one of these types of organisations? Does your work benefit Londoners? There is not an upper or lower limit for the kind of turnover that you need to have. So it's any size of organisation. So it's just 2 eligibility questions. You then need there's a section on your organisational information. I'll say a bit more about that next. And then there's the actual application and budget that you need to submit. So again, you can only make 1 application. So think hard about which is the right one for you. But you could be a partner in 2 or 3 if that's how you're working. So the information about your organisation, this is fairly straightforward stuff. And the idea is that once you've set up an account and filled in this information here, that you could then use this again for actions in the future. So you don't have to keep filling in the same information over and over again. You can obviously update it as things change, but your basic information is there. So your contact details, so the funders can get in touch with you, some information about your organisation, how long you've been doing what you do, how many people you support, where you work. There's a section on the communities that you serve. So this is where there's plenty of space to say, not just the 4 communities that we identified earlier, but other communities that you work with, who it is you're targeting, how your leadership reflects that community, if it does, or maybe you're on the journey to doing that, and how you approach issues around equity and justice, how you make sure they're at the centre of what you do. So that might be things like how you engage your service users in designing the services or evaluating the services. It might be something that's in your mission or in your strategy. There's a really simple section on your finances, which is a table with 3 years of information: income, expenditure, surplus and reserves. And one of those years needs to be your most recent signed accounts. We also ask for the previous year. If you've only got 1 set of signed accounts, that's fine. You do need at least 1 set of signed accounts though. So if you haven't been operating for more than a year, if you don't have signed accounts, then you won't be able to apply, I'm afraid. You can be a partner in a collaboration, but you won't be able to make an application yourself. And we also ask for your projections for what will happen at the end of this current financial year. And then you need to upload 3 documents: your governing document, your most recent accounts, and your safeguarding policy. So that section is fairly simple and straightforward. And then you get onto the application for a Deliver and Develop grant, and these are the questions that you will need to answer. These are, what, why, how, who, where questions. So tell us why the work is needed and what you plan to do to tackle that need. Tell us about your track record. How does that build on what you're already doing? Tell us about who the communities that you're going to target with this work and how they will be involved in the design and evaluation of what you're doing. Who will you work with? This is where you can tell us about your partnerships either existing partnerships or partnerships that you'd like to build, or why you're not going to, or why you're going to collaborate with people in different ways. Tell us about your staff. Tell us about who's going to be delivering the work and how you're going to support them. So funders are really, really keen to make sure that you know, people who are working in frontline community organisations can access the support they need, have good supervision, have good management, have good thinking about their well-being, whether that's through peer networks or other kinds of ways. And we recognise that these are often the things that get cut when or get stretched when times are hard, but ask for, you know, make sure you put a budget line in that says what you need to support your staff. Tell us where you're going to deliver and why you're choosing that area. It might be because you already work there, might be because there are opportunities to do so there. And then there are some questions about outputs and outcomes and impact. And, you know, this funding will be, I mean, these will be restricted project grants, but they will be as flexible as possible. So, you know, as you deliver, as you develop, actually your understanding of the impact that you can make, or the kind of outcomes you're delivering may change over time. But tell us about what you think it's going to be, and then tell us about how you're going to learn about what's working. So how are you going to you know, what are you going to put in place to make sure you're evidencing what's going well and what's not, and how does that help you understand what needs to be developed further? When you're putting together your budget, these are suggestions. Absolutely, you put in what you think is necessary and tell us what you need. But obviously you're going to need some capacity to deliver. You're going to need people to do that. You're going to need staff members or partners. Tell us about how you're going to support them. These are the costs I talked about earlier. Running a partnership or expanding a partnership has costs associated if you're going to do it well. It requires administration, it requires support, it requires time, so make sure you put that in. Engaging with people, with your service users in terms of designing and evaluating your services, that also has a cost associated with it. Often, you know, payments to service users who are getting involved in that way, but also a staff cost in terms of doing that really well. You're going to want to make sure that when you're delivering, your services are accessible. You're going to want to invest in learning and evidencing your impact. I talked earlier about a learning network with funders and with other grantees. You will need time to engage in that. And there's some guides in if you look in the FAQs, there's some suggestions about how much time you might allocate for that. And you're going to need some core costs for your organisation. And I'd love to be able to say, you know, this is what funders will pay in terms of core costs, because there's more than one funder involved in this programme. They will all have a slightly different approach, but you tell us what you need, and then funders can take it from there. The deadline for applying is the 9th of December. So that is 9 weeks from when the programme opened and just over 8 weeks from today. If a standard online application process is not accessible to you, get in touch with us at London Funders and we will provide you with resources in different formats, whether that's audio or easy read or BSL, and we can also talk to you about how you submit your application in a different format. I mentioned earlier our equity partners, if you are an organisation that's led by and for one of those communities that we identified earlier, you can get in touch with our equity partners who will give you additional support. So that's for communities experiencing racial inequity, that's UBELE. For deaf and disabled people, that's Inclusion London. For LGBT plus people, that's the LGBT plus Consortium. For women and girls, that's the Women's Resource Centre. And for organisations working across more than one community, that's the HERE Human Rights Network. So that's Christine's team. And the contact details are all on the help page of the London Propel website, or get in touch with us at London Funders and we'll connect you to the right place. So what happens after the 9th of December? So funders will do some shortlisting during December, and then in January they'll start their assessments, and they'll get in touch with you for a conversation about your application if you're being assessed. And also in January, we'll bring together an overview panel, which will look at all of the applications that are being assessed across all of the missions and across the different types of grants. And that overview panel won't be looking at the detail of the applications, but it will be looking at the spread across London, across different issues and across different communities, to make sure that there are no gaps, or to see whether we need to bring more applications through for assessment. We're hoping that the funders will make all of their decisions in February, and then depending on how long it takes to get the grant offer agreed, the grant agreement in place, you can start working from March or April next year. Right. If you're applying as a partnership, one of you needs to be the lead applicant. One of you needs to make the application and to identify in the question about who are you going to work with. That's where they can identify all of the other partners. Hope that go on.
Geraldine, sorry, there's a question here from Karen where she said, you've said that we can't use the grants to cover capital costs, but part of this mission says supporting communities to bring assets within community ownership. One of the discussions that we had with communities was they didn't even know where to start with the conversation about bringing assets into community ownership. So this is very much about how do you bring experts around you to help, say, negotiate with various organisations, that might be the local authority, etc. So no, it won't cover capital costs, but this is about how do you bring the right kind of experts to support a community, to have the conversation with organisations that have assets that you want to negotiate with, to bring those assets into community ownership.
Great, that's really helpful. You will know by the end of February whether your application's been successful or not. If your application isn't selected to be assessed, then you'll know in early January, and London Funders will do our best to give you feedback, although obviously we're not one of the funders, but we will get as much feedback from the funders as we possibly can for you. Your delivery can start in March or April. There isn't a latest date that the delivery would need to start by, but you would need to negotiate that with your funder. Interesting question about if we see applications that complement each other, can we introduce people? We can, if there's appetite for some kind of matchmaking session, then we're really, really happy to host those kinds of things. So let us know if you think you'd like to meet other people who are working on the same things as you. And it might be ideally that would, that needs to happen during the application stage. It's probably less easy to introduce people to each other after your applications have been submitted. Eastern Europeans absolutely fall under racial inequity. Question from Cecilia: would it be possible to combine in one application different items from 2 funding strands? You will need to, for a deliver and develop grant, you need to select one application, one of the missions to apply under. You could say more in your application how your work's going to impact on other missions as well, but decide which one is the best fit for you and make your application under that stream.
Geraldine, just a couple of really practical questions. Can we confirm to our participants that they'll be able to get a copy of the slides after the session?
Yes, so all of the slides will be available tomorrow. We'll put slides up from all the sessions and also recordings of the sessions so that people can, and we will be updating the FAQs with all of the questions that has been that have been submitted. Jan, I'm getting a lot of questions from you about a company. Can the lead be a charitable company limited by guarantee? No. One of you will need to apply. You can apply as part of a partnership. But one of the other partners will need to be the lead organisation. And the other partners in a collaboration can be all sorts of different organisations. They could be, I don't know, you could be working with a school, you could be working with a tiny community organisation, you could be, but the lead organisation will need to be a charity, a CIO, a CIC, or a community benefit society. So sorry about that, Jan. I hope that's answered your questions. The limit on what you can apply for is 1.5 million over 3 years. Oh, great. Lots of stuff as about matchmaking sessions. We'll come back to you on that. That'd be great. You could use Propel as match funding for something else. Tell us about that in your application. There isn't a specific limit on, there isn't a specific criteria about your reserves, because there are a number of different funders who'll be making grants under this strand. They will all have slightly different criteria about reserves. So I think for most funders, as long as you have a clear statement about as long as you have a clear policy on your reserves, and your reserves are within your policy, are within your own policy, then that's usually what funders look for. Grace from High Trees, you might want to get in touch with us if you want to talk through whether you're better suited to a Deliver and Develop or an Explore grant. Get in touch with us before you start applying.
Somebody's asked a question about, are we just looking for new and novel, or can we build on existing work? We're absolutely looking for building on existing work. We're not saying send us new, send us innovative. You know what you need. You know what your community needs. So if it's actually we need support to continue to develop something that we've already started, great. Again, you know, you'll have the opportunity through the application process to describe what it is you want to do, what you want to achieve, the impact that you want to see for community. You might want to try new ways of doing things, and that's where we're saying we don't have kind of that linear success rate within the program. You might tell us, actually we need to try a different approach, we want to try and work with a different partner, those sorts of things, but we're not saying it must be new and it must be novel. You know what works for you.
The question from Tracy about what happens after the grants finish. So if you've got a 2-year Deliver and Develop grant, would you then be able to go straight on to a long-term grant, to apply for a long-term grant, so that we're making that transition seamless? Absolutely, we don't have a process in place yet for what happens after this grant round, and we'll be working with partners over the coming months to make sure that the timing of future rounds and the process of future rounds enables that seamless transition between explore grants, develop and deliver grants, and the longer term grants. There's a question here about mentoring and counselling in communities. Yolande, does that feel like it's a would fit with building strong communities?
So certainly if that's part of your story that you're telling in your application, and that's something the community needs, yes. But what we would want to see is, I'm deliberately being slightly narrow here. I could take, for example, from that question, we want to deliver a service and it's a counselling service. That's not what these grants are about. But if you're actually, part of your story is what we've identified in terms of support for our community is we also have a need for counselling, but these are some of the things that we want to learn from being able to deliver on that. That would be absolutely fine. But like I say, that would need to be part of a kind of the bigger story for what it is that you're trying to develop and deliver for the community as a whole.
Okay, brilliant. Is the size of the grant linked in any way to the turnover of the lead organisation? Yes, your question did get a bit lost, Sylvie. Thanks for reposting that. It's most funders won't give you a grant that's more than 50% of your turnover in a year. So it would depend on the size of the organisation. The size of the grant would depend on the size of the organisation. I mean, obviously, if you're leading a partnership, not all of the money stays within your own organisation. So you'd need to set out how you would do that and how you would, your ability to be able to manage a grant that's going on to others as well. Yolande, question about network for advocacy, campaigning and policy be considered as a review. Yeah,
just spotted that. Absolutely. Remember, if we think about what building strong communities is about, it's about raising unheard and neglected voices. So we categorically recognise that if you're developing a network around how do you advocate for a specific community that's had a very unheard voice, need to think about campaigning and policy. Yes, that would be part of it. And again, coming back to that, how do you tell your story for your community as part of your application? This is the impact that we're looking for. This is how we need to raise voice. These are the people who we need to hear us. Obviously, that very much fits in with all of those words there: advocacy, campaigning, policy. So yes, that would work.
Great. A question from Hackney Quest about if you lead a partnership grant, it will skew your future finances for other applications over later years when not all of the money from that grant actually stays in your organisation. It gets spread across other partners. In my experience, funders are pretty good at understanding that. If you explain in future applications about, the money that you're holding for partnerships that's gone straight out, funders absolutely get that is an issue. Okay, I'm thinking we've probably answered most of the questions. It's quite tricky keeping an eye on over 100 questions coming in whilst also trying to present, but hopefully we've answered most of the questions. Yolande, can you spot anything in there that
There's a couple of questions there about reporting. Yes, reporting will be required, obviously, and to a quite considerable degree, that reporting will be based on your project, because these will be quite project specific. But yes, you will be required to report.
Yeah. So you'll need to have a conversation with your whoever's funding you about the reporting. Okay, I think
because it's project specific, that's where you need to really think about things like, particularly, for example, if you're going for a 3-year grant and you've described your impact really well, really think carefully about your milestones. How do we make sure, how can we demonstrate that we're going to be reaching that impact? where do my milestones need to be if I then need to speak to my funder again to say, actually, the context has changed a little bit. Can we review the impact with you? We want to review our milestones for impact. So some of that reporting is also going to be in your hands as well. So really think carefully about those outputs, those milestones, and how they relate to your ultimate impact. Thanks, Geraldine.
Yeah, that's great. And the grant will be managed by whichever funder has made the grant. So you'll be reporting back to them. So just to reiterate then that we'll make all of the slides and videos available for tomorrow. Or Monday morning at the latest, they should all be up by Monday morning if we're working to get them up by tomorrow. And also the FAQs will be updated tomorrow. We really, really appreciate your engagement with this. I hope that this has been a useful and informative session for you. And do get in touch with the info@londonfunders.org.uk address if there's questions, if you still have questions after today or after the FAQs have come out. And look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for spending some of your morning with us. Take care, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Yolande and Christine, for being on the panel.
Welcome.